Hi, well, welcome to the third and last session of our mini-course. There's an awful lot to go through today, and but I did promise it would only be 3 sessions long, so I'll try to get not to get bogged down in any one particular point. But we will probably continue this on Wednesday in the main class because if any issues are left over. On the other hand, I'll try to get all the good stuff in today if I can. Now, I was hoping to get through all 27 points on Friday, and I only got through 13, so I'm going to start quickly and go through the remaining ones. Point 14 on our handout sheet was don't use the same notation for 2 different things. So, and conversely, if you have different things, if you have the same thing, you should use the same notation. Okay, so the idea is then a bad thing would be to refer somewhere to a sub j, j to n in one place and a sub k in another place, unless there's some good reason. A lot of people also would refer a sub I. An index is usually called I. I think Fourier invented index notation using the letter I. But unfortunately, I is also the square root of -1, and so if you ever come close to complex numbers, you probably want to get used to using indexes k and j instead. Hello? Yes? Engineers use j for I. Because I is amperes. Yes. That's true also. So you start running out of letters. Do engineers still use J for I? My goodness, I didn't realize the implications of moving to the engineering school. Okay, now, I don't. I think that's dropping out, isn't it? Well, anyway, I had to do those labs too. Okay, so it is. Now, here is saying I'm choosing names for indices, so I varies from 1 to m and j from 1 to n, say. In other words, if you have different ranges, it's often good to stick to associate m with I and n with j, or with k and so on, and to keep alphabetical order. Right? A lot of times people will give n first and then m, and somebody says, well, doesn't m usually come first? Or you have A associated with N and B associated with M. It doesn't seem right somehow. So there's a little elegance or poetry or something that goes into choosing notation. Typographic conventions like lowercase letters for elements of sets, uppercase for sets in our example here can be quite useful as a quick guide to the type of an object in computer science set. Now, 15 is a really important one, and in the course I'm going to have an exercise that's based on removing unnecessary subscripts. And this text that we have, Writing Mathematics Well, has a detailed example of this and talks about this. It's a common trap that you can get into is using subscripts, and then you need subscripts and so on. And I try to explain one of the most common sources of this trap is if you want to introduce a set and then immediately you name its elements with subscripts. And so if you start out and you have a definition and x is already its elements are already defined as being x1 through xn, then a subset of x, the only way you can do it is by introducing another level of subscripts, x sub I sub 1 through x sub I sub m. I saw one thesis that was written in France where the guy got into 4 levels of subscripts. He says, now consider x sub a sub b sub c sub 1 through x sub a sub b sub c. All the information was in the 4th subscript. Everything else had to just be repeated over and over again. Okay, so and you'll have to be speaking of the elements of the set as x sub I and x sub j instead of x and y or something like this. So the idea is it's something like late binding in computer science. Don't bind yourself to the need for a subscript unless necessary, and then you can get into, you can even use x sub 1, x sub 2, or x and x prime or something as elements of a set. Okay, now the next is another basic thing. Important formulas should be displayed on a line by themselves. This gives the reader a chance to meditate on them at the proper leisure, and to see them again when you're reading them instead of sequentially. And then there's reference numbering convention. If you need to refer to the formulas for remote parts of the text, you give reference numbers to the. And now here I say that I give all of the most important ones, even if they aren't referenced. Now this is a little bit different from what some people say, but it seems to me that there are sort of two kinds of papers: those in which you have numbered formulas and those in which you don't. Now the ones in which you have numbered formulas, sometimes you can get by with only one, and you can call it star or something, just so you can refer to it as being my main formula or something. But if you have several numbered formulas, then the fact that a formula is numbered is implicit clue to the reader that this formula is fairly important. And so it also goes the other way. If a formula isn't numbered, the reader probably thinks, well, this is just passing interest and not very important. And so the idea is then somehow to keep a consistent level. You wouldn't number an equation that was really not very important if you're only going to make a reference to it that's not terribly exciting. The reference can even be made a little longer. The reference can say the equation in our derivation of some numbered equation or something like that. In order not to give too much prominence to an unimportant equation. On the other hand, an important equation, even if you don't refer to it, again, somehow the numbering does convey a little prestige to that equation. So I tended in the art of computer programming to number the equations that I thought were high class. Okay, now 7. Yeah. Question on that? Yeah.
When you're writing something complicated and have to deal with cross references of any sort, equation numbers are one example. Page and section numbers elsewhere in a book are another example. And things haven't yet solidified to that point. Would you suggest a way of keeping track as you go?
Yeah. Okay. So cross references. There's tables, tables, figures, exercises, and so on. And in the final book, when it's finally frozen, then these are fixed numbers. But while you're creating the thing, they're floating. And so, like in the book I'm writing now, I assign a tag to every exercise or table or formula that I want to refer to later. And the only problem I have is remembering what tag I used to get the syntax right exactly. If I misspell it slightly, then it doesn't match. So I've just been jotting it down on a piece of paper next to my terminal. Then the macros, when I see a draft, the macros will put these tags out in the margin while I'm getting my proof sheets, so that I can see what I call them. It's hidden in my computer file, the actual name that I typed for the tag, so I refer to things symbolically in my manuscript, and then and generate the numbers consecutively. With the macro inside the computer will give the next number. This leads to interesting paradoxes when you're typesetting and you add one more number, and something now went from 1 digit to 2 digits, and that means that one paragraph is now 1 line longer, and that means that one page is 1 line longer, and everything is all screwed up, and so then you try to fix that because you've made a page reference somewhere else, so the page numbering is now different. So you run it again, and then I think that flips you back into the other situation. I think you can get into infinite loops this way, and that probably is Turing undecidable whether or not there exists a way to break something. Well, anyway, that's another problem. Yeah. So the but anyway, cross references. The main thing is if you have something hidden in a computer manuscript, it's a good idea to print it out on your proof sheet so you can figure out what it was later. You don't have to search for it every time, and that's a significant slowdown factor otherwise. Okay, now number 17 is something again that I notice a great deal as I'm reading and writing is this left to right readability. As we're speaking to each other and as we're talking, our brains are anticipating what's coming up next in the sentence. Otherwise, there would be no way that we could communicate with each other or read books. We don't have that great a cycle rate inside our heads. The only way we could possibly do this, if you consider how much information is going on there, is if there's some way that we're primed to be ready for what comes up. For what comes up, we can't be just responding and keep up with only having two levels of logic between per phoneme or something like that. So inside our heads, we haven't got that much brain power. So people are reading reading these things, and as we go through, it helps us anticipate what's coming ahead. And every time we guess wrong, this slows us down and makes us lose track of some of the main point. So a lot of times I'll put in extra words that on logical grounds aren't strictly necessary, but for fast reading are important for someone to be able to see exactly what the state of the sentence is as we go along. Okay, well, here's some funny examples. Smith remarked in a paper about the scarcity of data. Oh, that's the end of the sentence. Okay, so he remarked about the scarcity of data. In a theory of rings, groups, and other algebraic structures are treated. Okay, now there are many other cases. So I'll often insert another word, to or by or something, when I'm giving a parallel construction. I'll say he wants to do this and to do that instead of he wants to do this and that. Sometimes it'll help depending on the context. So this left to right readability factor is something that you usually catch. It's something to keep in mind as you're doing your second draft. On your first draft, you don't notice this. You're writing at a different rate than when you're reading. When you read something, and when you proofread, you read at speed, and there you catch these things that seem quite right to you when you were writing them out slowly. Okay. Point 18 about small numbers. Now this is something that I haven't seen the rule that I think is right for computer science explained by the what do you call it, the high priests of writing in other books. They'll tend to use formulas and they'll say always if a number is less than some specified thing, depending on your style manual, then write it out in words. Otherwise, write it as digits. But I don't agree with that. Certainly, I usually don't write out the number 13,482 unless I'm writing a check or something. Well, you know, lira. You know, if you're in Italy or something. But now and then this question is to when, you know, the small numbers, is 17 a small enough number to write out, or should it be 17? But the point is, in computer science, a lot of times we're referring to numbers qua numbers as themselves, and the fact that it's a number would mean we wouldn't want to write it out, and so I give an example of bad. The method requires two passes. There you should write that out as two. It's the English word two. On the other hand, I have a lot of examples here where it's okay in fact correct to use digits. And so method 2 is illustrated in figure 1. Oh, now here, by the way, I have a bug in the file. There's too much space after that period there. Unfortunately, this was done. Well, okay. Now, if you want to use tech without paying attention to to the space after period, say French spacing at the beginning of your paper, and then TeX will never give an extra space at the end. TeX looks for a period and puts a little extra space at the end of a sentence, and the typist should put a little tilde, a little tie in there to tie the thing together, so that that doesn't happen, and it wouldn't break a line after this period either. Okay, so sorry, that's too far apart. Okay, now it requires 17 passes. I think 17 is a big enough number that we can write it out. Oh, we could have said SEVEN. I think the count was increased by 2. That's because 2 is a number here that was increased by, not by sort of an English word 2, but by 2. The leftmost 2 in the sequence was changed to a 1. Okay. You with me on this then? So when we're referring to parts of algorithms that are numbers, it would look funny to spell them out. On the other hand, 19, and a little bit controversial. What? Gary, you don't like?
Well, I'm curious about things about quoting 2 and 1.
Okay.
Rule 8 between left and right.
Yeah. Right. Okay. A lot of time. Yeah. If you might have put quotes around, and I've lately been. Pleased with the idea of using single quotes for something when I'm quoting a piece of text as a piece of text, as a textual object, and double quotes if I'm using a quotation of a phrase of somebody else or something like that in a more traditional usage. And so I could have said a leftmost quote 2 or something like that. But if you're writing a paper where you have a lot of discussion of stuff, these quotes get really distracting and have a lot of them. So it depends on the context as to how often you're doing this. I'm writing a book where I refer to a lot of Hebrew and Greek words, and here I have to talk about sometimes the words. If I just put them in italic or something, I don't need a quote around them. But sometimes if I'm translating them in saying what's the literal equivalent, it means literally, then I might put a single quote around or something like that. It gets. You have to develop a style and play with it for a while, and then be consistent. And the varieties of styles are useful. 19. I tend to think of things like Theorem 1, Lemma 2, Algorithm 3, and Method 4 as proper names, and capitalize them therefore as if you're somebody, as if they have as if they're John Smith. This was something introduced by my copy editor in volume 1 of the Art of Computer Programming. Originally, I wrote them all with lowercase, and the copy editor changed everything to uppercase except exercise. He left exercise 15 was always left as a lowercase e. And I said, why do you do that? He said, well, you didn't want it to seem like such a big deal. You wanted to think of it as sort of an easy thing, to do an exercise. So you don't want to dignify the exercise too much. But the theorems and lemmas, those were something important. So anyway, that's a suggestion. Yeah.
What about phrases like Euler's theorem or the deduction theorem?
Yeah, the deduction theorem. Now, Euler's theorem, of course, I would capitalize Euler, but that's another. But really, but words go through a transition when somehow they become lowercase. Okay. Yeah, Barry says some people use Turing machine with a lowercase t now. Certainly, there's an Eulerian path in a graph, a Hamiltonian circuit, Gaussian noise, and so on, abelian group, where these things originally were capitalized after the names of Gauss, Euler, and Abel, and so on, Abel. And but it's supposed to be the ultimate in mathematical prestige when your name starts being used with a lowercase letter. It gets so common nobody even remembers, a Tesla coil or something like this. Okay. Now the original question, although, was something like the whatever you call it, like the fundamental theorem of arithmetic or something. You say capital F, capital T, capital A, fundamental theorem of arithmetic. I do. I mean, I sort of, it's sort of quaint to do that. It depends if I'm using it an awful lot, or if I sort of just think of it as it somehow depends on the context, and I haven't got a definite rule. Sometimes I guess I would I would do it. Euler's theorem, I think I wouldn't capitalize the T unless it was, but Euclid's algorithm, I might capitalize the A because it's such a venerable old thing. I mean, okay.
Extract a rule from that?
Yeah, the extract the rule is that capital letters tend to denote venerability and uncommonality somehow. Yeah. Question.
What about acronyms like Fortran and Lisp? People continue to spell those with all capitals.
Yeah, that's true. Acronyms are well, actually Lisp. Now I asked McCarthy, and he waffles on this. He says he thinks he doesn't really know if it's an acronym or not, but he would tend to write it without all caps himself. Fortran definitely is an acronym, and all caps doesn't look too good, so you use a kind of a small caps or something if you're for typographic style or something like that. Pascal is definitely not an acronym and should not be done in all caps. PL1 is an example of a misspelling here on point 21. And I don't know. It goes with the designers of the language. Metafont is all caps. A preposition is a bad word to end a sentence with. Now these are self-contradictory maxims here, and somebody pointed out to me at the top of the previous page I even used by the fact that here. And I didn't even notice that. I don't even know how to shorten this word. So by the fact that I told you not to use by the fact that. It's usually redundant. But here I liked it. I don't see too much wrong with this sentence, but I come from Milwaukee, and people in Milwaukee talk that way anyway. Often ending sentence with but usually you can do better than ending a sentence with a preposition. The second one, when dangling, watch your participles. Now this one is kind of funny, but it's not really an example of a dangling participle. And I was trying to think of a good example of a dangling participle, and I still haven't got a good one. What, you got one? Ah, yes, good. On arriving in Chicago, his friends met him at the station. In other words, if you start out a sentence with something that has an ing in it, that's a participial construction like this, and like on arriving in Chicago, then the subject of the sentence is supposed to be what that ing refers to. So on arriving in Chicago, his friends met him at the station. That meant that his friends arrived in Chicago. It's a little bit okay. A soldier of proved valor, they entrusted him with the defense of the city. Young and inexperienced, the task seemed easy to me. See that. The right way to do that, young and inexperienced, I thought the task easy. On arriving in Chicago, he was met at the station, that sort of thing. So that's dangling participles. This is Strunk and White, page 13. About them sentence fragments. Now this is wrong on two counts, but sentence fragments can actually be extremely powerful and just the right way to get the point across. To have a fragment of sentence that doesn't have a subject or predicate, but when you're doing it, you're supposed to. It's supposed to be because the punch comes. You can say, wait a minute. That's not a sentence fragment. That's an imperative. You can say, use sentence fragments never. Okay, good. Thanks, Tracy. And don't forget it. Okay, that's an imperative. So that's okay. But many times you'll find people, your favorite writers are definitely using sentence fragments beautifully well. But it disturbs the normal rhythm because normally a sentence contains a subject and a predicate, and therefore, when you use it, you're doing it for an effect, not as a standard thing. Make each pronoun agree with their antecedent. That one, what? With his antecedent. Okay. Don't use commas, which aren't necessary. We're going to talk more about this rule later and try to never split infinitives. Okay. Now I got a list here in Rule 21. This is based on many years of experience grading term papers, and I added to this list. But these are things that I have seen misspelled at least 20 times on term papers, and so they're real ones to learn to use properly. So please read them. Oh, it's everybody knows this. Quick rule. Why is it? When we have possessive pronouns, when you say theirs and its and his and hers and ours, we never put an apostrophe in. Every time else you have possession, you put an apostrophe in. But pronouns, when they're possessive, they don't have the apostrophe. Okay, now there's the questions about hyphenation, and words go through a sequence of getting less and less hyphenated the more common they become. When a new word is coined, it's hyphenated, and then later on somebody just finally decides to drop a hyphen. Yo-yo, I think, is no longer necessarily hyphenated. Used to be. And non-negative, non-zero tend to be in that category. Non-positive, maybe. But what is it? I can't think.
Non-monotonic.
Non-monotonic. Yeah, probably not. Anyway, a lot of these nonce words are start out being hyphenated, and then depending on and then usage eventually gets the hyphens removed. And this happens in ordinary words as well as mathematical words. Now here's something that I got to say something about which versus that. I used to always say which much more often than I should have, and some people would comment on the drafts of my book, and they would say, Don, you should say that. And in fact, I gave this course, and people would talk to me about which and that, and I didn't understand. And all of a sudden, I got another copy editor, and the other copy editor marked lots of them in the second edition of Volume 2, and I had that on a computer. And so I started going through with a computer search for every place I used the word which. And I found that there was a simple algorithm to decide where she had changed it to that and where it was which. And that is, I look at the thing that immediately precedes in the text. If it's a comma or a preposition, then I change it to that. No, if it's not a comma or a preposition, I change it to that. So if it's just followed by something else, then I change it to that. There was another case when it's used interrogatively, like I say, which rule is this? But okay, the main cases are preposition. You can say by which, in which, and then you can say comma which. That's okay. But otherwise, leave it out. So here I have don't use commas which aren't necessary. See, there's no comma in there, so you change it which to that. But if you put a comma in, then it's okay. That's don't use commas, which aren't necessary. But that's saying something that's contradictory. But otherwise, it would be, if you said don't use exclamation points, which aren't necessary, then it would be quite valid sentence.
Yeah, it means two different things.
It means two different things. Yeah. Now the idea is that a lot of people like me didn't know this rule, but then now have learned it. In fact, this rule sort of went sweeping through the literary establishments during the 70s, and all of a sudden, you would pick up one issue of Time magazine or something, and there wouldn't be a single wicked witch in the entire issue, and ever after. And you pick up novels, and the novel either has all kinds of wicked witches in it, or it has none, and it disturbs me very much now because I hear people quoting from my old books, and they'll say, Knuth said such and such, and it has witch in there. I say, oh, did I say that? And I hate that. Okay, so the it's something that's now very much more prevalent in America than in England too. That this idea, but you can certainly notice it in the books, and I find myself marking this over and over again on drafts of theses and so on that I'm reading, and so it really works a lot better to use the word that unless it's preceded by a comma or preposition. Now let's see, what else was it here? We're talking about punctuation, but here's punctuation before a display. A lot of times people put an extra colon before a display, and I wouldn't. I don't like that. That's what the point of that rule is. Now here's another one. The opening sentence should be the opening paragraph should be your best paragraph. Its first sentence should be your best sentence. Now this sets the theme for the whole thing. If you've got a really great beginning paragraph, the reader is hooked anyway, and he won't even notice if you're sloppy the rest of the way through very much. But if you have a really bad start off, the reader is going to say, "Oh no, I'm going to have to get a comfortable chair to read this document." The worst possible start, and I've seen it on many a term paper, is to say, "and X is Y," and it's just a dead sentence, and it just leaves you completely what do you call it? Bored at the end of the sentence. So an important method for internal sorting is quick sort, and so much better to start out, be direct. Quick sort is an important method for internal sorting, and say why, because it's quick, Okay. A commonly used data structure is the priority queue. You can tell what term papers I was quoting from. I was teaching a data structures class once. And so you start out, and instead of saying an X is Y, you say Y is something in Y, and explain about it. And that gets right to it. That's much more lively. Okay. Boy, I'm running out of time. The 25 is about punctuation. And here I've got single quotes as an example of referring to a word in itself. Always end your program with the word "end." Now, people, there's an old, long-standing rule that commas and periods tend to go inside of quotation marks, but semicolons and exclamation points and things don't. And the reason is that it looks better. And that people are used to it, and so when they see something that they're not used to, then they forget what they're reading, and they start thinking about the form of the document instead of the content. Now Oren, my co-author, has suggested a compromise, and that is that we can use both conventions, but backspace and sort of go halfway. Now he wanted to do it the other way. He wanted to put the quotes and then the period outside, but then back up a little bit so the period is a little closer to the quote, so that it won't be quite so noticeable, But for me that was still too noticeable. So I have the period inside, but I back up the quotes a little bit so that we're getting closer to. Anyway, we can do, but to me it still looks a little strange to me to see a period outside of a quote, although I think Phyllis did it here somewhere in the previous parts of the notes. I don't remember. But it was it got in here somewhere maybe. What? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, but here I'm really referring to a word around. Yeah, I'm really probably a single quote would be better there. Yeah, less instead of fewer. Yeah. Okay. Martin mentioned since instead of because the other day. I wish you hadn't said that, because all of these rules do restrict you a lot. I've already thrown out 4 sinces out of that book since Wednesday. But use parallelism when parallel concepts are being discussed. No.
The commas inside and the period outside?
Where are you? I'm sorry. Rule
8, 1, 2, 3,
yeah.
4, 5. The commas outside, the period inside.
Yeah. I think this should be. This would probably be better there. And the rules are really strange. Mary Claire has a nice long discussion about this, where you when you're giving dialogue, you put the thing in, something John said, and he didn't say the comma, but the comma is always inside the quote. He said it with a period. Okay. Now, but there's something that, anyway, that's wishy-washy, this idea of, there's different, people are saying, let's go for logical punctuation now and forget these old formal rules, and then we'll have a revolution, and there are people that are thinking that way, and pretty soon it'll happen, I suppose. But there's something that has to be right, and that is, it has to be logical with respect to parentheses and brackets. And so this, I see this a lot. Here's a bad example that does it, both things wrong. You've got to have the punctuation should make sense without the parenthetical remark. And so I would in order to fix this up, what do? You move the period outside the paren, and you take out this comma. Jargon. Now there was long strings of nouns as adjectives. The packet switch data communication network protocol problem. Terry Winograd had an example of an infinite sentence that went on. I mean, it eventually got into a loop and would go on. And this tends to be a defect of modern engineering technology, and it can definitely be overused. Jargon is, there's a very interesting experiment was made by people at the communication department here about 15 years ago. They took some technical papers and they rewrote them without jargon and gave them to people in the technical field to read, who would presumably all know the jargon and be used to it in their papers. And they also gave this to a variety of other kinds of readers, but they edited papers simply to take out the jargon, not to change anything else. And in all respects, this was an improvement, rated better by all readers as far as the paper being more easy to understand. They passed better comprehension tests on it and everything, even though it was for specialists. Now it's very tempting when you're writing a paper in a certain field to show that you've done your homework and you know all the buzzwords, all the things the way people are talking about it. But in fact, you're better off if you don't use this unless it's a concept that's needed so often in your paper that you needed it for an abbreviation. Now, when I started working on typography, I started learning that there was all kind of technical terms for different parts of letters and things like this, and it was and so when I wrote an article about these things, I sort of felt like I should use all these brand new words that I didn't know last year, and I had to realize that this temptation was not actually improving the clarity of my paper. It was just trying to be a little bit of one-upsmanship, not too good. Here's a great example quoted out of a book called Mathematics Made Difficult, and there's a book. This book is in the library. It's a wonderful book it's full of it has the longest proof of 2 + 2 = 4 that you've ever seen, and this is if you read through this, you will see that it's precisely equivalent to another sentence which I was fortunately able to quote from my own book, which was about the factorization. So anyway, this has a bit less jargon in it, although certainly I still wouldn't use the same thing when I was talking to a third grade class. Now, part 20, point 27, when in doubt, read my book for outstanding examples of good style. This was a joke, and humor is something very important, I think, to mention in writing. I think it helps to keep a light attitude to the subject, making it so that a person actually there are some authors where we like to read what they wrote even if we aren't necessarily interested in the subject, even though it's a technical subject. But the best use of humor is if the joke doesn't get stale, or it can't be too corny, or I mean, some of the puns in this book that I'm working on now, I really had to kill. And everybody has different standards of humor. So there's and this changes year by year also. But the goal to keep in mind is that if a person can get the idea that there's a joke there, if he only understood the material, then that's another motive for the reader to understand the material. And so such uses of humor tend to be the most effective, is where the person says, you know, I think I really enjoyed this if I gave it a little more thought, and then they would. Now, the guy who wrote Mathematics Made Difficult had this other quote here, which I mentioned. It says, "This empty is absorbing on the left and neutral on the right, like British toilet paper." And this I thought was making a good point. If you've ever been in Britain, now I wrote a paper called "The Toilet Paper Problem" in the Math Monthly, and I was tended to go too far, and Helmut, the editor, wisely cautioned me against it. I mean, it turns out that there were very many words have a double meaning, and I had a subtitle called "The Process of Elimination," and he said, no, this was just, you know, a year from now, Don, you aren't going to be glad that you wrote that. So he was right. Yeah, I wanted to say one more thing. The opening paragraph was your best paragraph. When I gave this homework assignment once before, and I remember Steve Vegdahl's solution to it. He said your opening sentence should really catch the reader's attention. And so he started out. He said, "Ripping off her dress," he said. You know, let L of C and P be a subset or something. What? Yeah, the overflow room won't be. Yeah, one in the RL won't be an overflow room after today. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Now let's see. We still have some minutes. I would like to take a look at a couple of the papers that you did, and see what came on with. What? Boy, people have been using tech for these. It's interesting. Now, okay. So let's take a random example here. Okay. This is okay. Lemma: if L is C and P, then in C are unequal empty, then C. Unfortunately, the lemma is not true. Yeah. Now, okay. So this is okay. So some mathematicians use this notation to mean contained in or equal to, and some use it to mean proper subset. And if it means proper subset, it's not true. So let's go. But anyway, so let's change to this notation. Now, that was a typographic error in the remark. Okay. So let's try it now. So. Since M can be 0, C and C imply C. We got to put something between these two things here, right? So the hypothesis C in C implies C in L of C and P. That C is a subset of L of C and P. That's okay. It follows from this and from this that C is contained in A sub n. Okay. Yeah, he's doing the logic. He's trying to repair it in either direction. And but I would assume let's just make this correction: less than or equal over here. So we will prove such and such by contradiction. Assume not. About them sentence fragments. That's awkward. That's awkward. If I would say, if P is not if P is not contained in A, and there is a vector P in P such that P is not in, thus so on. Now, okay. Now there's a general thing about how long the sentences should be, and whether or not to have a semicolon there or stop the sentence and and start a new sentence there. And that only that depends on the context and on the flow as you're reading it as to whether I would break the sentence there or not. As I'm typing something up, I often break a sentence into two parts, and I take out parentheses often too. When I'm writing a manuscript, I'll often have a remark which I put in parentheses, and I'm typing it, and I take out the parentheses. That doesn't seem to be very parenthetical after I'm writing it, but afterwards. But before anyway. But anyway, here it could go on here for some I less than k. Thus, bi greater than bk for some I less than k. Choose any vector c in C since it's a subset of an, we know that a sub I less than or equal a sub k. If we choose n is equal to this number here, and p of j for comma, I would put a comma here. If I have a sentence starting with a long clause, I definitely want a comma for breaking.
N tells you the next thing starts.
Yeah, but I still want a comma. If something, then I this is this little extra added redundancy is useful for parsing it. And besides, this was an awfully long clause. My teacher used to say, if it's 4 words or more, put a comma after the introductory clause. This is more. This grace with me. Then the resulting vector v such and such is in LCM P and hence in A sub n. Since m is this and since okay, again I put a comma here. This word since is nice because it helps parse the continuing thing. It would, a lot of people would leave that out, but I think it helps. And since it follows that a prime greater than or equal stringing these things together, probably this is mathematically correct because but this contradicts that v and n, hence are something incorrect in p and so on. Okay, so that's reasonably. Let's go to another one. Choosing at random. Which one should I be? Call left or right?
The next one.
This one. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Let's see. Before I forget, there is a handout. Did you get it? What? Has it been passed out? Oh, okay. Where's my copy? Oh, okay. So I have a handout which was sort of my solution to this, written some time ago, before I forget, well, no, let me go through this first. Okay, now we show that if L, C, and P is a subset of A sub n, then P is a subset of A sub n. Okay, this word now is reasonable sometimes to punctuate the things or to give present. And the only trouble is you can't use it very often. You can't use it, twice in the same paragraph. This happens now, but after you've got the setup, you can say now, but you can't say now and then now this and then now that. That gets pretty tiresome. But it's reasonable. It's not necessarily, I don't know about the comma there, but it's not too bad. We will prove the result by contradiction. Suppose that L of C P contain an A sub n, but this. Okay, now I like the word that there, as I told you the other day. Then there exists a vector R in P such that R is not in A sub n. Therefore, comma, there exists. Now I wouldn't put the comma there. That's a pretty short introductory phrase. Therefore, there exists indices. Whoops. There exist indices I and j with I less than j. The plural of index is indices, except if you're talking about the indexes of 2 different books. Do all books have indexes? And there's vertexes and vertices. My copy editor once changed vertices to vertexes all the way through, and I just couldn't do it. I had never read a book on graph theory that talked about vertexes, and I just couldn't. I had to change them all back again, even in galley proofs. Okay, therefore there exist indices I and j with R less than j such that R sub I less than R sub j. He hasn't defined the notation R sub I and R sub j, so we have to. So this is undefined notation. Got to figure out. You got to say R equals R sub 1, R sub 2 up to R sub n or something like that. Okay, since this is in A sub n, then for any that's awkward. Since this is in equal A, then for any vector A, it's better to take a sentence like this and completely break it into 2 parts. So this sentence here is awkward. I don't have a quick fix for it. Another now, you see, we had it twice here. Too many. And then the sentence style seems to be very much the same. A lot of times an introductory word followed by a comma. It'd be better to have a little more variety there. you could say if we now let, I suppose, but if we let k equals this, which is a non-negative integer because such and such, we have, oh, that's a little bit redundant there. We have C, okay, C plus Ci plus R is in A sub n. All right, now let's see. I want to hit the high spots here because there are several problems, but ith element and jth element, that's not too bad to refer to that. Usually typographically this will be in italics, but you don't need a hyphen in between them. Some people put a hyphen there, but I don't think it's necessary. But this IE, I want to talk about that. The word IE, the phrase IE and EG should almost always be followed by a comma. But it's probably better not to use it at all, unless it's a nice short way to say that is, and EG is a short way to say for example, and some people use EG for that is and IE for example, but generally put a comma after them if you do use them. I didn't specify that elsewhere, but it's almost always better because this is in apposition with everything other stuff there.
Question?
Yeah. Question.
What about using etc.?
Etc. Yeah. Well, etc. is don't spell it ECT in the first place. Ect. And etc. is tolerable. Although and so on and so forth, it's often look a little better to the reader. In the handout, I pointed out at the end another important aspect of mathematical exposition, and that is the proof by contradiction can often be replaced by a direct proof, which is both easier to present and often proves more. So although proof by contradiction is a nice way to solve a problem, it gives you extra hypotheses to work from. Often you can do better, and so I rewrote the proof without using a proof by contradiction. This is another point also stressed by Gilman in the text. So the proof by contradiction allows you to get by with fewer hypotheses if you look through it. Just see, a lot of times there's a false proof by contradiction. Somebody that doesn't use the hypothesis really. Another thing that isn't necessary is to choose I and J with BI greater. You can always go for I and I plus 1 if a vector is in non-decreasing order, if and only if the adjacent components are in order, and so that would make a slight improvement to the exposition. So although our writing assignment was to rewrite a specific exposition, there's another point is that there's often also a better proof in mind. Try to think about that when you're writing up a proof. Try to avoid proof by contradiction unless it's really an important element of the proof.
Question?
Yes?
You use the phrase "it follows that."
Yeah.
Is that best used once?
It follows that. Now that's one of the almost that. It's a 4-syllable way to say therefore, and it would be bad to use that phrase over and over again. But I can use it. I can probably use it twice on a page, maybe. So there are some things you can't even use more than once a chapter, but this one isn't in that category. But it's not like a lot of the variety it's an issue. If every sentence has the same da 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 da, then it quickly gets tiresome. And so, but you just switch around between 2 or 3 possibilities, and people have forgotten already that you used the previous one. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot. On Wednesday, I'll come up with some other neat choice examples from your homework if I can think of it.